All right, a little game called Which Schedule of Reinforcement is this? All right, your choices are going to be ratio or interval, and then fixed or variable. All right, so there's like two levels going on with each of these examples. So the first one, you're getting paid weekly no matter how much work is done. Normally I'd sit here waiting for somebody to offer an interpretation in class, but we're not in class and I'm all by myself. So I will say that is a fixed interval schedule, right? So every week you get paid. So you're being paid based on an interval of time, and it's a fixed amount of time. It's every week. Hitting a jackpot after some handle pulls on the slot machine. This is a variable ratio because you don't know how many times you have to pull the handle on the slot machine. You have to pull it some number of times, right? So it's variable, and then it's based on the behaviors, the handle pulls. So it's a ratio. It's not based on time, it's based on behaviors. Winning some days on the lottery, you play once a day. So you play the lottery every single day. Sometimes you win. My intention was to emphasize the days with this example. And so I called it variable interval because you play every day. Sometimes you go 1 day between wins. Sometimes you go 30 days between wins. Sometimes you go 365 days between wins, I assume. Some amount of time passes between each win. So my students have argued that the purchasing of a lottery ticket is a behavior, so they've argued that it's a variable ratio. I guess you could say that, but I would like to argue that since I emphasized day by listing it twice, that's a hint I was going after interval. So if you were to see something like that on a test question, use the cues I give you. Checking your cell phone repeatedly. Sometimes you have gotten a text. We do this a lot, don't we? This is what we would call variable ratio because checking is the behavior. Sometimes that behavior is rewarded by you finding that you actually had gotten a text. You buy 8 pizzas and get the next one free. That is a fixed ratio. You have to do 8 behaviors and then you get a reward. So hopefully that helped to clear up, some real life examples. Here is a depiction of, the rate of responding based on the type of reinforcement that the learner is getting. So the x-axis is showing you the passage of time. The y-axis is telling you how many responses the learner is giving. And this is actually based on a rat pushing a lever. So it's not the most complicated behavior that's going on. Wherever there's a little black tick mark on the graph, that's where a reward was given, a reinforcement, a food pellet appeared. So the blue bar that's going straight up is fixed ratio. So they get rewarded after, every so many numbers, a fixed number of lever pushes. So the rat just sits there pushing the lever. He knows, lever pushing is the key to his reward, and he just keeps going with that behavior. But notice variable ratio, the green bar that's right next to it. You see almost as persistent a behavior when the rat got very close rewards at the beginning and then that long dry patch before the next reward and then a shorter but still decent length dry patch before the next reward. The rat is going to keep with that behavior on that variable ratio schedule because they don't know how many lever pushes it's going to take before the next reward comes. So both of the ratio types of reinforcement schedules causes a lot of behavior quickly. So you'll notice that in 20 minutes, basically you've gotten to 1,000 lever pushes in both of the ratio schedules. Now, if we looked at the other two bars, you're going to notice that they're both the interval schedules. The first one, the red one, see how it's kind of swoopy? What that's representing is where there are places where that red line is basically horizontal to the x-axis. That means that there's not much responding going on. And then there's this flurry of activity right before the interval ends, and they're about to get rewarded. You can tell that the learner is not exactly sure whether it's just the passage of time that's causing the arrival of the food or if it's the fact that they're pushing the lever. So at the last minute, they start doing a bunch of lever pushing. It turns out it was, in fact, just the passage of time, but you get this flurry of activity right before the interval ends. With the variable interval schedule, what you see is very steady responding. They're not doing a lot of lever pushing, but they are doing it very consistently in the variable interval. They don't know how much time is going to pass between rewards, so they just basically are kind of always pushing the button. But you'll notice that the interval levels, they never really get to the rate of responding that you see with the fixed ratio. Even after 80 minutes, they have not gotten to the 1,000 lever pushes that you see with either of the ratio schedules. So if you want a lot of behavior from your learner, you should probably put them on a ratio schedule. If you want them to persist and be steady about it, probably one of the interval schedules is better. For my classes, I try to make sure that your exams are spread out in a way that you have time to maybe take a breath and then study and then get ready. And I assume that there's going to be a flurry of activity in the week that the exams are open and like that. So I use fixed interval, whether it's a face-to-face class or it's an online class. I use fixed interval because I just want you to have moments where you don't have to constantly be working. And that when it's coming up so you can plan out your own schedule and stuff like that. Like I want you to be able to do that. I've heard a lot of argument in favor of variable interval schedules, which in classrooms would take the form of pop quizzes, right? Like I could just put in a little quick 5-item quiz that you just have to take whenever I put it up there. And I don't know, for one thing, it feels like a control attempt. I feel like you're in the best position to decide when you should be studying. And so I don't want to force you to have to do it at the rate that I need you to keep up with my lectures or whatever. But it's hard to argue against the steady responding that you see in the variable interval schedule. I just can't do it. I can't do it. I tried one time to implement pop quizzes. The students hated it. I didn't like prepping them. It was just a nightmare. So I don't do it. I go for fixed interval and I say to myself, well, you know what? Overall, there's more behavior going on in the fixed interval than there is in the variable interval. So I'm going to assume that the analogy for you guys would be that you're studying more in this fixed interval than you would if it was variable interval. That's what I'm telling myself. That's why you don't have pop quizzes. All right. I think it's time to get to the other possible outcome, and this would be punishment. This is any outcome that weakens the behavior that it follows. So reinforcement is any outcome that strengthens the behavior that it follows. Punishment is any outcome that weakens the behavior that it follows. There are positive and negative punishments. Remember, positive means add, does not mean good. So positive punishment would be to add an undesirable outcome. So I mentioned that the Skinner box, they could electrify the grid on the bottom of the box and shock the learner, right? That's something that psychology is credited with doing more than psychology really does, shocking the learner. But I had to throw in shock as a possible punishment. Giving extra chores would be an example of a positive punishment. We're adding something that the learner doesn't like. So this little boy did something wrong, and so to pay for it, he's being punished with having to do the dishes tonight. That's a positive punishment, adding something that the learner doesn't like. Negative punishment, remember negative means to subtract, so that we're going to be removing a desirable condition. So we're going to take you away from what everybody else is doing and make you sit in the corner or sit in timeout, right? So you don't get to play with us anymore. You don't get to watch the movie. You were being naughty. And so we're going to take away whatever it is that we were doing. You don't get to do it anymore and you have to go sit over there. Really powerful. I told you about my son and his button economy to play video games. Really powerful because I had a lot of ability to take away his video games and it hurt. I knew he wanted them. So I was able to take away something I knew he really wanted by taking away his video game. My daughter, if I needed to punish her, a really easy way to do that would be to take away her whatever book she was currently working on. She loved to read. So whatever works, and again, remember that law of effect. You have to figure out for your learner what would be a positive punishment, what would be something that you could add that they wouldn't want, and what would be a negative punishment. What would they not want to lose. And it's tricky if you do this with children as they age, it kind of changes what they would or wouldn't want to have happen to them, right? So taking away my daughter's books worked for, I'd say, maybe 3 years. That was a pretty effective negative punishment. Taking away my son's video games, I think I had more power on that one longer. I think that probably spanned, I don't know, probably a good 10 years that he was, living at home and stuff. He would oftentimes say things like, well, I bought this video game machine of whatever type he had, and I bought the games, you can't take them away, right? Because he's old enough now to have his own money and stuff. I'm like, I can flip the power switch to this room, dude, and you got nothing because I buy the electricity. And he's like, no, I forgot about electricity. So I mean, you can take away whatever they like, or you could add something that they don't like. And again, a lot of times my students don't like the word punishment. In fact, it's almost always in personality theory that I have a student who pushes back with the word punishment. And they say, I don't think we should use the word punishment. Well, that's great that you don't want certain words to be used, but it's the term that Skinner used for this. So this is the word that Skinner used for this. The baggage I think the students are carrying who say that is they think punishment means physical discipline, some kind of spanking or maybe even more abusive kinds of physical stuff. And that's not even on my list of things that Skinner meant by punishment. He never spanked a rat. I can guarantee you he never spanked a rat. Now, did he electrify the grid under their feet? Yeah. Now, did he do it to a point where he was going to harm them? No. It was enough to, if you've been shocked on a 120 amp? 110, I think it is. 120. Whatever we plug into the wall, if you've been shocked, it tingles and it makes you pull your hand back and you go, but it doesn't harm you. It's enough to make sure that you don't stick your finger in there again. And that's kind of what the rats would experience. But here's the thing. You want to have an effective punishment that is something that your learner has made very clear through the law of effect that they don't want. You want to have something in your tool belt that you can invoke that it's clear that the learner doesn't want. And it's clear that the learner doesn't want it because they changed their behavior afterwards. And then you want to use it sparingly. The number one thing you want to do is reinforce whenever you can. Reinforce desirable behaviors whenever you can. The presumption of operant conditioning theorists who try to explain personality through operant conditioning principles is that your current set of behaviors that you're displaying are evidence of the reinforcements and the punishments that you've experienced in your life. That the environment has guided you towards the behaviors that it deems desirable and away from the behaviors that it deems undesirable. And so your current personality is reflective of the unique combination of reinforcements and punishments that you've experienced. I've had parents tell me that they've tried punishments on their child that just don't work. Like, I've tried taking away Xbox and it doesn't work. And I ask them, well, how do you implement it? What's the circumstance? And I'll hear that they have decided to take away the Xbox for a month. Punishments should be designed to weaken the behavior that it follows and not designed to be an assertion of power by the person who's instituting the punishment. Taking away something for an entire month and there's no way to gain it back, there's no way to change behavior in such a way that would reflect that I deserve it back. That's an assertion of power. That's not an assertion of, your behavior needs to change and this is just a consequence because your behavior was undesirable. I think that's where a lot of times parents and, dog parents and things, you get into like this standoff with the learner and it feels like the learner is being, I want to say rebellious, but the word I was trying to think of, it has more disrespectful connotation to it. Like they're deliberately just trying to defy what the parent or the dog parent has decided, whatever. If you take away that kind of emotionality and instead say, okay, I can't have my learner doing this behavior anymore. I only took away my son's Xbox if he wasn't keeping up with his schoolwork, or his chores around the house or his responsibilities, his very minimal responsibilities, as you know, like a 13-year-old. If you're not keeping up these 5 things that I expect from you every day, no, you are not playing with your Xbox tonight, right? But tomorrow is a new day. And there's the possibility that if you are back on track and doing what you're supposed to do, you will get to play your Xbox tonight, right? Like that, it shouldn't be a power struggle. Like, now it's not perfect. My son says to me, well, I bought all this stuff. You can't take it away. And it's like, you live in my household. Yeah, I can. Okay, now we're getting into a power struggle. You got to kind of step back and say, okay, it doesn't matter what little snarky thing he's saying. That's not the point. The point is, I want these behaviors out of him. He did not display them. This is the consequence. He knows that that's the consequence, right? There's nothing else to say about it. So I would argue against getting into power struggles with your learner. And like I said, it can be a dog. Sometimes it feels like your dog is being defiant. And it's like, okay, it's a dog. It's probably not being defiant. Probably not. But a lot of times we find ourselves in these circumstances. And so it's really super important to unemotionally consider punishment just a consequence that can weaken the behavior that it follows. That is its sole purpose. Okay. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this after I want you guys to see. After Amy Farrah Fowler joined the cast of Big Bang Theory, suddenly they stopped calling negative reinforcement. They stopped calling punishment negative reinforcement. So that's kind of awesome because she has a PhD in neuropsych. And so she came in and she's like, you guys, you can't embarrass us with these like basic incorrect Skinnerian terminology. But you'll see how these guys have decided to implement punishment, positive punishment, in their own circumstance. So I'll see you after this video.